Greetings my fellow 40k fans and welcome to the channel. I am your gracious host Adeptus Artorum, and here on this channel we aim to bring you the many facts, lore and stories of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Now in today's video I have chosen a topic that I feel is relevant to the current goings on within the 41st millennium, and with the announcement of course 10th edition of 40k and the Leviathan starter box, I've decided to give you guys a brief overview of the Tyranid Hive Fleet known as Hive Fleet Leviathan. Now, just a small note, I will not be discussing the Tyranid War or any of their conflicts in great detail in this video, though it may be mentioned in context with today's subject. With that being said, rest assured it is something that we aim to cover in future content if that is something that you guys wish to see. So, first of all, what exactly are Tyranids? Well, basically put, Tyranids are a hideous species of insectoid xenos, usually comprising entire spacefaring ecosystems made up of an uncountable number of bioforms, which are essentially all variants of the exact same genetic theme. Now, Tyranids are not like any other form of intelligent life within the galaxy of M41, existing to essentially survive and caring only about their own evolutionary advancement. The Tyranids are a collective of creatures all essentially forming one big superorganism controlled by a collective consciousness usually referred to as the hive mind. Now, the hive mind is a nearly all-knowing entity which is comprised of pure psychic energy, said to have originated somewhere outside the Milky Way galaxy. The living vessel for this hive mind being a hulking bioform known simply as Tyrannicus Perfecta, or a hive tyrant. Now, this huge bioform is said to maintain a mental stranglehold upon other Tyranid bioforms, and as such directs their every move. Now, I feel I should mention that Tyranids, unlike other beings and races within the galaxy of M41, are essentially the ultimate predators. To them, all life forms, whether it be the vastly populated empires of humanity, or just mere life forms and insects upon the bottom of, say, a rock, are absolutely nothing but prey. Now, as I mentioned before, these creatures are concerned with nothing but their own survival and evolution. Now, unfortunately for any being that may find themselves face to face with one of these creatures, this survival and evolution comes in the form of consumption of biomatter. More specifically, the consumption of all other biomatter, that being all biomatter that is not of Tyranid origin. Now, where the evolution and survival aspects come into play is in how this biomatter consumed is used. That being using the consumed biomatter to effectively give them all the ability to rapidly evolve and reproduce. Now, this insatiable hunger for survival and the excessive consumption of biomatter leaving entire systems basically torn apart in order to reproduce new Tyranids, leaving nothing else but Tyranids alive, as you can imagine, is an immense danger to the other inhabitants of the galaxy, a danger that has only recently begun to be truly acknowledged. Now, when I say danger, honestly, I may have been understating it, as truly, unless the Tyranids can be stopped, it will more likely spell the extinction of all life within the known galaxy and beyond. This being due to the whole kill everything, make more of us aspect of their existence. Now, these creatures travel through space in biomechanical ships, known simply as hive ships, consuming worlds and producing more and more Tyranid bioforms as they go. Now, when these hive ships form large armadas containing a range of ships able to transport a full range of the various Tyranid bioforms, they are referred to as hive fleets, which, as you can imagine, are then utilised to attack and subsequently strip entire star systems of their biomass. Now, this is where we get into the subject of this video. So, the Imperium of Mankind first came into contact with Tyranid Hive Fleets in the Ultimate Segmentum, in the eastern fringes of the galaxy, and have so far only come into contact with 3 primary Hive fleets directly, excluding of course smaller splinter fleets. And let me assure you that every run-in with these Xenos the Imperium of Man has had has met with a huge loss of life, not to mention damage to the Imperium and its property. Now, the Segmentum Ultima's command gave these 3 primary Hive fleets designations, as the Imperium does with most if not all enemies it faces, those being Hive Fleet Behemoth, Hive Fleet Kraken, and of course the topic of this video, Hive Fleet Leviathan. Hive Fleet Leviathan was the 3rd of these primary Hive fleets to reach Imperial space, arriving in the year 997 of Millennium 41, and bore the largest Tyranid incursion into the Milky Way galaxy that humanity had ever seen. The arrival of this huge Tyranid fleet would mark the beginning of the currently ongoing 3rd Tyrannic War for the Imperium of Mankind. Now, all this was also beginning to unfold less than a mere 5 standard years succeeding the defeat of the before mentioned Hive Fleet Kraken in the 2nd Tyrannic War in the year 993 of Millennium 41, following 3 years of brutal conflict. Now, a Lord of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition by the name of Lord Inquisitor Cryptman had noted the telltale signs of yet another Tyranid invasion brewing in the year 997 of Millennium 41, and so he implemented what is known as the Cryptman Census, effectively burning out and killing dozens of astropaths, essentially psychers responsible for carrying out all communications that in turn ties together the communication and travelling network of the Imperium using their telepathic abilities, in an attempt to essentially contact the many fringe worlds of the Imperium of Mankind. Now, with the responses of these worlds, or rather the lack of them, the Lord Inquisitor was able to map the course of the Tyranids' latest Hive fleet using these communications as a pattern. And so the Inquisitor concluded that the fleet was to arrive in the Milky Way galaxy. Now, this time the Tyranid fleet was approaching from below the galactic plane, attacking in the shape of a huge closing pair of jaws, positioning themselves at 2 points spaced far apart from each other, and what this essentially did was cut off large chunks of the galaxy from the ability to warp travel or even use astropathic communication. Now, on the world of Tarsis Ultra, with a combined body of forces consisting of troops from the Planetary Defence Force, 2 regiments of the Imperial Guard, the Mortifactors and Ultramarines chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, and an armed-to-the-teeth Deathwatch kill team under the command of the Lord Inquisitor Cryptman himself, the Imperium were able to effectively pulverise the left half of the approaching Leviathan fleet, successfully destroying the Tyranids closest to the Imperial homeworld of Terra, subsequently re-establishing astropathic contact with those worlds between Hive Fleet Leviathan's before mentioned jaw form, and as you can imagine, this came with a huge cost in human lives, yet the Imperium had claimed its first victory in what would become the ongoing 3rd Tyrannic War. Now, regardless of this victory, Hive Fleet Leviathan continued to ceaselessly tear its way through the Imperium, carving and consuming any and all life forms before it, and so we get to one of Hive Fleet Leviathan's most pivotal conquests, the home of the mighty Titan Legion, Legio Griffonicus, the Imperial Forge World of Griffon 4. Now, Inquisitor Cryptman at this stage had realised it to be imperative that he find a way to slow the advance of the Hive Fleet, if for nothing else than to give the Imperial Navy time to muster its battle fleets, those being Battlefleet Tempestus and Battlefleet Solar. And so, with a grim yet decisive attempt to carry out this objective, Cryptman ordered the establishment of a cordon. essentially the evacuation and then immediate exterminatus of every world possible, effectively denying the attacking Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan the biomass required to renew and replenish themselves, essentially causing the Tyranids to expend bioforms for very little to absolutely no gain. Now, while I commend Cryptman's quick thinking, essentially making the best out of a bad situation, what we have to understand is that with this one heinous spare of the moment decision, Cryptman had effectively committed the worst act of genocide perpetrated upon fellow human beings since the galaxy-spanning Horus Heresy and its traitor forces, effectively condemning billions to death by the inferno of exterminators. Now, as you can imagine, Cryptman was later denounced as a radical inquisitor and confirmed excommunicatus traitoris, and subsequently cast out of the ranks of the Inquisition. Now, regardless of Cryptman's banishment from the Inquisition, he still had allies loyal to him within the before-mentioned Space Marine chapter known as the Death Watch. Essentially, the Death Watch are a unique chapter of Space Marines in service to the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, the Ordo dedicated to hunting alien species, as the name implies, in which they serve as the Chamber Militant. Now, due to his remaining connections to these Astartes, the Inquisitor was able to intercept a plan to effectively halt Leviathan, and this time a plan to do so without any further loss of human life. And so when a Tyranid-infested Space Hulk drifted out of the warp, members of the Death Watch who still held loyalty to the Rogue Inquisitor captured a brood of the creatures in a state of stasis, and so utilising this captured brood of live Tyranids, Cryptman formulated a new plan in which he engineered a Tyranid invasion within the system known as Octarius. The key part of this plan being that the Octarius system was inhabited by a huge infestation of orcs. Not to mention, the system of Octarius was extremely close to where the Hive Fleet Leviathan was currently making its advance. Now, what you have to understand here about orcs is that once an orc infestation starts on a world, it is almost impossible, if not completely impossible, to stop. Orcs spread via releasing spores that effectively gestate in the soil and then later emerge as orcs when matured, making the spread of their species quick and vast to the extent of literal infestation. Now, not to mention that once the spores are rooted on a world, it becomes nearly impossible to get rid of them, excluding of course that of exterminatus. Now, with the latter considered, you can imagine the sheer multitude of orcs inhabiting the many crowded cities of the Octarius system. And because of these cities being essentially teeming with life and subsequently biomatter being there to consume, the system of Octarius soon drew the attention of the advancing Hive Fleet Leviathan, which soon navigated its way into the tight cluster of star systems known simply as the Orc Empire of Octarius. This plan by the ex-Inquisitor, as you can imagine, worked like a charm, and so both the Orcs of Octarius and the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan now remain in a state of constant conflict, effectively destroying each other over and over again in a conflict that has since been dubbed the Octarius War. Now, one thing you have to understand about this ongoing conflict is that both of these races thrive on war and conflict. Tyranids, as explained earlier, kill, gain more and more biomatter, replenish their ranks and continue on to the next, with the overall aim of, well, essentially surviving and evolving. On the other hand, the orcs were bred specifically to love war. It is embedded in the very fibre of their being. Orcs live for war and conflict and have a literal unquenchable thirst for battle and bloodshed, and this extends far beyond wars against the other races of the galaxy. To orcs, this is the most integral part of their culture and identity. And now, with these factors considered, it seems like an almost foolproof plan to pit two extremely combative species against each other, essentially keeping them in a state of constant warfare, effectively keeping the Tyranids distracted, thus away from the many human civilizations they were advancing towards. Now, yeah, you have to imagine the possibility that perhaps the Tyranids could in fact prove victorious against the forces of the Orcs. And if this were to be the case, it could prove literally devastational, if not fatal, for the Imperium. As like we mentioned before, unlike the other many races of the 41st millennium, Tyranids lose essentially no military resources, nor military might, no restocking ammunition, no waiting for soldiers to heal before redeployment. In fact, to the complete contrary, Tyranid casualties and still living soldiers, along with whatever may remain of the conquered world that they are essentially invading, are just then essentially just reabsorbed into the hive ships involved in said invasion. And so every victory that the Tyranids win have utterly no repercussions. In fact, to the contrary, every victory holds nothing but benefit. And when you look at it from this standpoint, you also begin to realise that if the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan are victorious in the Octarius system, this also essentially means that they will be able to assimilate and incorporate huge quantities of the Orcs' DNA, which makes them such triumphant survivors, not to mention such determined and formidable opponents in warfare, into their own bio-constructed beings. And to this end, I just want to mention the fact that there is in fact mentions of recorded Tyranid captures from worlds on the edge of the Octarius conflict, stating that the organisms captured are in fact much larger and hardier than ever before recorded, which honestly I don't think bodes well for the future of any opposing these horrific Xenos. Now, again, I understand the Inquisitor's thinking in this matter, but yet again, I feel that his actions were once again irresponsible, and he just essentially formulated this plan and executed it half-cocked, for lack of a better term. And when you think of the implications that this one man's manipulation could have for not just humanity, but all life in the universe, the level of the threat that Cryptman could have essentially unleashed upon the 41st millennium is almost too terrible to even begin contemplating. Now, I thought that I would also mention something I would have usually mentioned earlier in the video, that being that usually different Tyranid hive fleets produce bioforms with different colour schemes, and bioforms that hail from the hive fleet known as Leviathan usually all bear the distinct coloration of having pale white skin with deep purple adorning their carapaces. And on top of this, the weapon biomorphs usually tend to be a shade of red. Now, I will mention that a somewhat umbrous council within the ranks of the Imperium of Mankind, named the Strategic Collective, is said to have been analysing the various details regarding Tyranid invasions, and while doing so have essentially come to a terrifying and blunt conclusion. This being that the hive fleets that are currently facing humanity to this current date are simply put just mere components of a significantly greater whole. What is even more terrifying is the fact that this significantly greater whole is sure to arrive within the borders of the Imperium within less than a standard Terran century, that being less than 100 years. This strategic collective estimates that in order for humanity to have even a chance of fending off this threat, military mobilisation levels will have to increase output by a minimum of 500%, yet 500%. This percentage would essentially have to include every single able-bodied man, woman and child on every world in not just the Segmentum Solar, but also Segmentum Obscurus and Segmentum Tempestus too. And just remember, this is something that will have to happen if humanity stands even a mere chance to face the Tyranid horror that is yet to inevitably come. Now, as always, there are many other conflicts and stories that involve Hive Fleet Leviathan, like of course the attack on the Blood Angels Astartes chapter homeworld of Baal, aptly named the Devastation of Baal, said to be the largest concentration of bioforms from Hive Fleet Leviathan ever encountered by humanity, and many more of these stories exist also, but in this video we're just trying to give you guys a brief overview of Hive Fleet Leviathan and the situation the galaxy finds itself in regarding the Tyranid fleet coming into 10th edition. Now, I hope this video has given you guys a brief insight into the Tyranid Hive Fleet known as Leviathan, and whether you're a new player coming into the hobby or a long-time veteran, I hope that this video has given you guys a basis to build your stories onto going into the 10th edition, whether you aim to consume all the biomatter you can and grow your Tyranid force, or whether you plan to oppose the Gene Stealer invasions and cull as many Xeno monstrosities as possible. Now, we have come to the point in the video where I usually leave you guys with a quote, and today I have chosen a very simple quote from Chaplain Ortan Cassius, the Reclusiarch of the Ultramarines Astartes chapter. And I personally think that though very simple, this quote sums up the threat of the Tyranid Hive Fleets extremely well. We must scour them from the stars before they do the same to us. Now, this has been a video going over some essential information pertaining to the Tyranid Hive Fleet known as Leviathan. Now, as always, this has been just a brief overview of this subject, and if you would like to see more information pertaining to Hive Fleet Leviathan and the stories surrounding it, feel free to throw a comment below and we will absolutely consider your ideas for future content. We hope that this video has given you some basic insight into Hive Fleet Leviathan and aided you in understanding the situation regarding the fleet going forward into 10th edition. From us here at the Adeptus Artorum YouTube channel, we wish you all the most fun possible going into 10th edition and can't wait to hear some of the stories you guys come up with to go along with your armies and campaigns. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up, and if you want to stay up to date with the content that we produce on the channel, please don't hesitate to hit subscribe. Not only does it keep you guys up to date with our endeavours, but it also helps to support the channel immensely and shows us that we are delivering content that you guys enjoy. Now, with that said, I have been your gracious host, Adeptus Artorum, and I thank you for watching.